Hey y'all, it's David Ducker
and Mike Lopez.
coming back at you. And today we're going to be talking about Alric Berengar. Now, I've already done a character profile on Alric, but Mike is the architect, the creator, and the actor, the writer behind the character of Alric, because being a role player has many transferable skills. And also, it's been a year, perhaps, since I did that video. The character's evolved since then. So, Mike, why don't you take us through who is Alric when we meet him in session 1?
Okay. So, when I created Alric, it was with the intention to make a character on the tipping point. Alric was a year after having been horribly scarred at a tournament. An accident, or was it, when a lance pierced his helmet and ruined his face down the left side. And he was a very handsome, very vain young man at this time, and very popular suitor for a number of young ladies. So a lot of that went away. He was somewhat politically astute, or at least doing a good job of making friends in the right places, but when his face was ruined, he became very angry, very difficult to get along with. He lost a lot of friends. So I built him in this place where he could either come to grips with what had happened to him, learn and redeem himself, or where he could allow himself to continue to wallow in this and become a less and less sympathetic character. As is very early on, I think it was the second session, we saw him behaving rather violently.
Yes.
Prisoners, pirates, slavers. He was mercilessly smashing their skulls in because
no fair trial was given.
It's
all trial by combat. You elected yourself the champion of the state.
Yes, and basically just because they weren't telling him what he wanted to know. So I put him in this position where a lot of people would say he was an evil character. And I wanted him to very much be a character that you weren't sure where he was going to go. He was concerned about his honor, but he would do these terrible things. So it was very difficult to determine just by planning out what would happen with Alric. And that's something I like. I like having characters that will grow organically as the campaign moves along.
Yeah, I appreciate that, you started off not committed, so that during the campaign you could make that choice, or the character could make that choice. Mm-hmm. From a GMing perspective, what I saw is you took the trope of the angry young man, you fleshed it out with specific incidents, so it had a history and a resonance with the setting. And then you kind of plotted a couple of different arcs you could go on, either the softening and the redemption, or the hardening into something completely monstrous. So I did a previous video producing your character. You make the character and you think about his storyline. So for Mike, he took a non-linear approach. He didn't produce one storyline. He made a character and then he started plotting a web, even before he started playing it. Because that's the most fun for Mike.
Mm. When I make a character, I don't really want to know where he's going to land. I understand for storytelling purposes that can be good, but personally I think it's more realistic because none of us know where we're going to land. We have an idea, hopefully, maybe, but it's really just a guess. And I feel like a character should be the same way.
Yeah, and I discussed that concept more in depth in my other video, which we could always reshoot if you're very interested. So that's who he was, though, in session 1 when we met the character. Why don't you describe the journey that the character went on, and then we'll talk about where he is now. So what's the journey that he's been going on for these past 40 sessions?
So initially, as strong personalities surrounded Alric, and he started to make a place for himself that was based on his achievements rather than people he knew and the women that wanted to be with him and that sort of thing. He was starting to make peace a little bit and understand he could have self-worth without the same things he valued himself for before. But he couldn't let go of his vanity. And so when he sought out the help of the priestess of Shalia to heal his scar, she tried.
It was a hideous scar, by the way. His lip was torn open. He was drooling. He actually wore a veil over his face, and they started calling him the Veiled Knight.
Yes.
And he wasn't happy about that nickname.
Initially, but then they started whispering it in fear.
Yes. So it was a very, serious disfigurement. It wasn't just a scar.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, continue.
So eventually he sought out the help of a priestess of Shalia because he couldn't let go of his vanity. But because he was such an angry and violent person in his actions, Shalia wouldn't help him. And the chaos power Tzinch, he of the questionable pronunciation, came in and made things worse. He cursed him. He gave him the jaw of a skeleton.
He skeletalized the man's jaw.
Though it functioned fully, unlike the scarred jaw before had leaks, the skeletal jaw did not leak. But any redemption that Ulrich appeared to be gaining was completely lost at that moment. He was full of fury. I know at one point in time he pushed a man off a cliff that he probably wouldn't have before that.
You threw Bastille off a cliff.
Yes.
That was great.
And he threatened so many followers of Shalia, the goddess of mercy, because he blamed her. He had no idea otherwise. I knew he was a player, but the character was not well versed in such intense divine knowledge, just to realize that a ruinous power could come in and do that.
And of course, Ulrich, he had started to look for hope, to try to not be this hardened individual. And then he had one setback, and he immediately took the hard line towards being a horrible monster.
Mm-hmm.
Because Shalia had let him down. He was going to make her pay for it.
Oh, yes.
So at that point, everyone thought the whole story would be the fall of Ulrich Berengar.
Yeah, the joke that was going around was declaring war on mercy.
War on peace.
Right. But when we returned to Nuln, to his hometown, there was a miracle, and all the gods came together, or so it appeared, we don't know, through their chosen one, Grandmaster Stephen, and Ulrich's face was healed, not just the curse, but also the scar. He's once again an incredibly handsome man. But what this has done is, although it's restored him, and he's become very popular again, and he's become much less violent, it's given him a completely different focus. We all know how easily driven to an intense cause young men are, and Ulrich is no different. All of his fervor now goes towards the gods. He's growing into a fanatical devotee to Sigmar, and though his devotion to the upcoming crusade is admirable, and it's made him incredibly popular, as has the miracle he was part of, there's also a lot of potential for it to drive his friends away. He already has angered his compatriot Conrad Morag by deceiving him, so that Conrad will help him to secure swords for the crusade. And he's pretty much prepared to sacrifice just about anything for the cause of the crusade. And as we all know, that sort of person is very dangerous, and a lot of people won't trust that sort of person.
That's true.
And even in a medieval style world where anyone would be a fanatic by our standards, someone that is that fanatical is very scary.
Well, maybe not by any standards. This man doesn't eat bacon, and I consider that madness. But so we've taken Ulrich, we gave him this hope spot that he was going to get cured, and he got slapped down instead, and he started to get really bitter and evil because of it. But then he actually was cured, but he still had that anger. Some of that anger was still inside of him, that bitterness from the failure before. So and Mike has done a great job of keeping that with the character. So he's not zigzagging. he's taking these slow curves. He's dragging his baggage along with him, which is what real people do, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately. Probably unfortunately, but but he's kept the realism and the continuity there through the character. Is there anything else you wanted to say about where the character is now?
Again, he's sort of in a precarious place because there are a lot of people in important places that are putting their trust in him right now because he was involved in the miracle, because he's closely involved with Grandmaster Stephen, who will lead the crusade. But as a result, we've seen dialogues between his uncle Savage and their new compatriot,
Sixtus.
No, Johann Schmidt.
Oh yeah, yes, Johann as well.
They're concerned about Ulrich and where he's going. And like I said, Conrad Morag, his other companion, is concerned because he found out that Ulrich deceived him to help the crusade. And his cousin, Ovina, has never gotten on with him, and it's always just been for different reasons.
Yeah, that's true. So where do you think Ulrich will go in the future of the campaign?
I think it very much depends on what happens in the campaign. If Ulrich meets success, I think a lot of things will work out fine for him. People will like him because I think the way he will deal with that success, putting it on the gods and not necessarily gathering power to himself, is something that people will appreciate. But failure, I have a ton of plans prepared for if there's failure, and things will get ugly if there's failure.
Yes. As a GM, my perspective on Ulrich has always been I don't like Ulrich because Ulrich is very predictable. He's deep. He's got great motives and reasons for everything he does. But, as deep as they are, it's clearly going in one direction. Or maybe two directions. But he's very straightforward, kind of dependable character. And I hate that as a GM. I love to be surprised by the characters. I don't want to know what's going on. And I pretty much know exactly what Ulrich's going to do, 75% of the time. And that's a high percentage, in my opinion. So I mean, that's kind of, from a meta perspective, that's how I look at Ulrich. And that's why I've always tried to put the other characters over who are less predictable. But, Ulrich's kind of the Arn Anderson of our group. He's really sturdy and dependable, and he's always there.
Well, when I wrote Ulrich, he was not designed to be the main character. I specifically avoided making him the heir or head of the house when I wrote him because I wanted to have someone else in the spotlight. It's just been the circumstance.
Well, everyone avoided writing a main character except James, and he's perhaps the least suited to play a main character.
With his skill evidenced set by him leaving the campaign.
Perhaps, yes. So what has Ulrich's interaction been with the rest of the party? How have you enjoyed some of those interactions with the other player characters? Are there any memorable moments that stood out there?
Well, initially, we were supposed to have an interesting dynamic with Ulrich and his uncle Lewin, who was going to be played by Rick, who left our group.
Big Daddy Rick.
Because they were supposed to be very close. Ulrich was never close with his father. So Lewin, his great uncle, was supposed to have taken him under his wing. Between Rick leaving the campaign and just the way things went, it didn't play out that way. So what I've done is made it seem that Ulrich feels Lewin has changed in his old age, and there's something off about him now.
Which, is true. I mean, everyone is seeing this evolution of the character as he grows older, and some people would say more senile. Others would say he's finally gaining clarity in his old age.
For a while, we had Blaine Charrington, played by Kevin, in the group, and he was a very straight.
He was even more straight than Ulrich.
Whereas Ulrich would be an anti-hero, Blaine was just a hero. And he was kind of a good influence, albeit often at odds with Ulrich because of his fiery temper and violent tendencies. And
I do remember you two did have at least one confrontation where your characters got in a heated exchange. I believe it was after you threw Bastille off the cliff.
it was.
And that was the best role-playing I've ever seen Kevin do. Mike, of course, always has great role-playing scenes. As a GM, I don't have to work on getting anything out of him. So he just sits there and just, here, have this great role-playing. So he's in that sense, a very low-maintenance player. But he really elevated Kevin's game, which I appreciated.
So that was a good little dynamic there. Not especially interesting, though.
Yeah, one good, really good scene in, 30 sessions.
Yeah. Other than that, it was mostly, I think we should do this plane. All right. But probably the best dynamic is the one between Ulrich and Scotty's character, his cousin Ovina, because they're so at odds. Ovina is a very naive priestess of Shalia, completely dedicated to mercy. Even other priests and priestesses of Shalia would view her as being extreme in her dedication. Yes. And Ulrich is violent.
Yes. You see, I would have thought that you were going to say Conrad, because you and Josh have had really good role-playing scenes and great interaction.
No, my best interactions with Josh were when he played Ulrich Bear, because they hated each other so much.
But I loved that confrontation after you lied to Conrad and he confronted you about it. I thought that was really, really good stuff.
That was good. It was a really good scene. And honestly, sometimes after a scene like that, you have to take a step back and remember that you didn't just offend the person you're next to.
Yeah.
I finished that scene and
Josh's all red in the face.
And, I breathe a couple times and then I think, oh, yes, we're not upset with each other.
Yeah.
It was good. And good and unfortunate at the same time because until now, Conrad had been the first character of Josh's that had got along with the character of mine, though I think we'll mostly be okay with that in the future, but Josh has had bad luck in terms of that.
Yeah, actually, I think I did a video on player versus player with Josh as my guest star, which is very, very apt. I don't know why, because in real life, Josh gets along with everybody. He's a great guy.
Very mild-mannered.
And Mike also gets along with everybody. I've never seen you have a problem with anyone. So I think that's everything I can think of with Ulrich. Did you have anything further to add?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Is there anything mechanical about his build that you want to talk about? Because I never talk about that stuff, but I know you've I believe gone into some depth on his build.
Yeah, actually, that is a good thing to talk about. So when I was designing Ulrich, one thing I forgot to mention in his backstory is he's not supposed to be especially skilled as a fighter. In fact, the Master of Arms of House Berengar, Buck Salder, was hired specifically because Ulrich was incompetent. They needed someone a little less orthodox to train him. And even then, Ulrich couldn't master the axe fighting style. He had to use a mace because it's harder to miss with a mace.
That's true.
So one thing I specifically avoided doing was investing too much experience into his fighting skill. So in the Song of Ice and Fire role-playing system that we're using, two dice is an average, 3 is above average, 4 is good, and 5 is skilled. So I started Ulrich at 3, basically being above average, above a peasant in fighting, because he'd had some training. And I eventually moved him up to the 4. But I held pat on that 4 dice for a long time because I wanted to make sure that other fighters were naturally better than Ulrich, whereas he got by with his specialization in the mace and with his ability to absorb punishment. He's very athletic, he takes very good care of his body, so I put a lot of dice into his agility and into his athleticism and into his endurance, so he could absorb a lot of punishment. He wears heavy armor, so it allows you to take a different approach than you might take. You think of a knight having a lance and being a sort of that heavy hitter. Well, Ulrich has been more of it's supposed to be more of an absorber of many blows, very difficult to properly injure, and he slowly wears you down. Now, the downside is because of the amount of experience Ulrich has accumulated from being the single character to survive from the beginning of the campaign till now as a player character, so much, he's actually kind of become a little more competent than he was originally meant to. So sometimes when he'd like to wear his enemies down, he just
kills them.
Yes.
And that's a separate issue. It's just when I started out, I did not expect them to earn so much XP, but I had our level progression mapped out, so I just compensated by giving them more XP per event. But they ended up with so many events that Mike has a huge glut of XP beyond what he should have.
Character creation included, I think I'm over 1,000 now.
You're like 1,300 or 14.
Not quite that high.
No?
No.
Okay. I could be wrong.
But I think the next highest is probably around 600.
Yeah, the next highest XP in the party is like half. Half of what Mike has.
So longevity has its advantages.
But that's basically Ulrich Berengar, the Veiled Knight in a nutshell. Of course, check out God of Damarung on Facebook, Return of the Rune Fangs, same campaign. This is the main man, the protagonist, if you will, for the anti-heroic style. So everybody, have yourself a good day out there. Cheers.